Hey, Sid from Vellum here. Really excited to, be here talking to you guys. So, we've spent 3 years making it easy to build and deploy production grade agents here at Vellum, but unfortunately, I'm retiring from being an agent builder myself. It's very sad. But the reason for that is, I had a good run, so don't feel too sorry for me. But the reason for that is we're launching the beta of our natural language agent builder. So in theory, right, you go in, you chat with it, and it builds whatever agent you want. I know everyone here, you're here, right? So there's some agent that you want to build right now that you don't have. You guys should try it out. It'll probably work for a lot of you. It is in beta, so there are some hiccups, but this is something that we're really excited about. We've spent a lot of time on, and we also learned a lot about building agents in general throughout this process, and I'm going to share some of that with you guys today. What I'm going to go through today is like, why even build an agent builder, like a natural language agent builder in the first place? What we learned about monitoring and eval specifically, because, that's a hot topic. There's, plenty of controversy, debate. And, finally, it's like, where are we planning on going from here? Like, what's next on the horizon for us? How are we thinking about the future of building agents? So yeah, but why though, right? So, as I said, we've been doing this for 3 years. We spent the first 2.5 of those 3 years building this super flexible drag and drop editor and, a really robust, powerful SDK for people to build agents. And, that's all cool. But however, drag and drop is dead. Like, what is this? Like 3 months ago? Like, come on, right? You can't do drag and drop anymore. And of course, you don't want me to go on and on about this cool new framework that we built. None of you want to learn that, and you don't have to. And also, did I mention drag and drop is dead? So therefore, we built a natural language agent builder. This is, this is what it looks like. You go in, you chat with it. You should go to our booth later and check it out and check it out live. We're back over there, but we learned a lot of lessons. Since this is the last agent that I'm building, I figured I'd share the learnings throughout the way. So I think there's like two big meta lessons that, that everyone should take away. If you think something might work, you should just try it. Like, it's totally possible to hill climb your way to something successful. You can just try a bunch of things. If you have any inkling that hey, this could make my agent better, just try it. I don't care what the conventional wisdom says about it. You can just figure it out in 10 minutes. And, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's just try whatever you want for your agent. And, the more you can step into the shoes of the LLM, the better you're going to be at building agents. Fundamentally, they don't think that differently from the way we think, right? How certain are you that you're not just predicting the next token? If you really think about it. And if you don't believe me, try this. Next time you're in a high pressure situation, just prompt yourself. Be like, oh yeah, what we usually do in that situation is, and then you'll hallucinate something. Trust me, it works. So really step into the shoes of the model. But anyway, on to the real lessons. So number one is really care about your tools, right? That's the number one problem we see. It's the symptoms include not calling a tool when you should, calling a tool when you shouldn't, calling too many tools, calling the wrong tool, calling the right tool with the wrong arguments, your users just going into blind fits of rage. So if you or a loved one have experienced any of these symptoms, ask your doctor if Vellum might be right for you. But, in all seriousness, you have to set the model up for success when it comes to your tools, right? So that means don't just blindly copy the APIs that you might be using or the underlying abstractions. Think about the high level actions that you want your model to take from first principles, right? And then think about the simplest possible way to represent those. Group them, in terms of let's say there's 3 API calls you make in sequence. You take the output of this one, feed it into the next one. That's an action, right? Those are your tools. Start there, and that first principle thinking really helps with things like this. So if you The real takeaway here is like, if you do this upfront work once, you'll avoid your agent having to do it on every single run at runtime. Because if you don't, your agent's going to have to think about that and it's going to make more mistakes. So, you should be doing things like omitting and simplifying arguments, grouping API calls into like more coherent actions, and you should avoid some common pitfalls. Like sometimes your tools don't work, right? Return descriptive error messages. If you're just like error, like gee, thanks. Like what's the model supposed to do with that? Like honestly, right? Like it's like, say, was it a timeout? Should I try again? Was it like a bad argument? If so, what was bad about the argument? Because you want the model to be able to gracefully recover from bad tool calls and errors. And you need to like, these are models. They think they're trained on our data. They think quite like us. So if the names or like the descriptions of your tools or the names of the arguments are confusing to a human, they're going to be confusing to the model as well. And if you have multiple tools that are like doing kind of similar things, consider making them more different or combining them and like having an argument to specify what you're doing. So another corollary to this is, models are pretty good at managing their own context. So for example, in our agent builder, we have like 100,000 tokens of like Vellum docs that, talk about how to build agents in Vellum, use our SDK, all that. We could load that all into the system prompt, but like that's going to be really slow and expensive. We could do like a more complex retrieval solution as well, but what we found to work well is we just created a knowledge base of about 30 documents and put summaries of those, really small summaries, kind of like, like the abstract of a paper that's like makes you want to read more, into the system prompt so the model can call a read knowledge base tool to figure out which knowledge base entries are most relevant for this specific query. And it's doing that throughout the building process. Oh, I need this kind of node. Okay, let me read about it. Things like that. And, when it comes to testing, right, not just with agents in software, there's a fundamental tension between, moving really fast, avoiding regressions, and having to write a lot of tests, right? So you can pick two of these, right? And you lose the third one. And honestly, for a lot of cases, it's probably fine to not write tests. Like you shouldn't feel ashamed about that. If it's only you building something and you're not gonna iterate on it that much, then like it's probably fine. Like you don't need tests. If you're okay with the occasional regression, like this isn't like, controlling like something in a hospital or something, like it's probably okay. Like it's a fundamental trade-off, and don't be shamed into having to write tests that you don't want to, but ultimately they are useful, right? There's like vibes-based testing and like a more rigorous test suite, right? They both have their place. I know some people are like, you gotta go vibes, you gotta go rigorous. You can do one, neither, or both. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. So vibes are really good for when you're just starting out because it's really obvious when you go from something that's broken to not broken. You don't need a test suite to tell you that. It's also really good for like, like judging the UI UX kind of, and I'll talk about that later as well. Like how does the agent actually feel when you're interacting with it? That's more difficult to measure through, a more rigorous test suite. But a concrete test suite is really good for, let's say you have a really high pass rate. It's really difficult to tell the difference between 85 and 88% on a test suite by vibes, right? You're probably just gonna get noise. You're not gonna be able to really make improvements after that. And if you, like a more concrete test suite also prevents you from like regressing on capabilities unless you're testing every single thing manually, right? We ran into an issue where it felt like we were taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back before we built a more rigorous test suite for our agent builder. And finally, it's like you can set tests, you can create tests for things that you want to pass that you're not currently passing. And that's really, really helpful for iterating on your agent until it passes those tests. So that's a tool we use a lot in our development. Hey, this workflow or this agent isn't being built properly, let's add a test for it, and then let's make it pass. Another thing, you need to look at executions. It can be frustrating sometimes. It's kind of like watching a video of you giving a talk. It's never fun, but it's really important because this is what your users are seeing ultimately. So I mean, obviously, like store everything, right? Like storage is cheap. Tokens are more expensive, but like user data is invaluable. If you're throwing away like what your users are actually putting into your system, you're gonna regret it because you're gonna want that data later. So as I said earlier, it's like you need to be able to think like your agent, and the best way to do that is by actually looking at these executions. Like you can see here, this is a bad execution from our agent builder. What happened is like it's a little small here, but like it ran into a bunch of import and type errors. It didn't really like say anything good to the user. There are a bunch of thinking steps, tool calls. This is garbage. I cringe even looking at this still, but like we saw this, we looked at this execution, there were like 20 takeaways from it, and then we fixed them, right? So that's the iteration process that's worked really well for us. And one really cool thing about the models is that sure they output text, but like just because the models are outputting text doesn't mean that that's all you have to show to that's all you can show to your user, right? Agents can elevate their own UI UX. So if you look here again, right, we have these thinking blocks, we have these tool calls, we show like, what's done, what's not done, and then we actually have like an interactive UI element to connect your Slack because you need that for the agent that you're building. You need to like integrate with Slack, you need to, take various actions. And it's like, this is stuff that we parsed out purely from text, right? So like, this is all possible. It's like, you want reasonable defaults, but full visibility for like users that want to dig deep, like, collapse blocks by default if most people don't want them, create interactive buttons and elements, don't make people type when they don't want to. A paradigm that I think is really interesting is text in, UI out. So I think that's where things are going to keep going. So, at a high level, like, what's next for us? Like, what are we thinking about? So, right now, you use Agent Builder, and, like anywhere from like 30 seconds to like 2 minutes later, it hopefully spits out a workflow or like an agent that does what you want. We want to be able to show like more real-time updates in terms of what Agent Builder's doing, so you can see the workflow as it's changing. We're still thinking about what the right UI UX for that is. Another thing is, what does a good mobile experience look like? There'll be a QR code in a second here. You should check it out, but like don't use Vellum on your phones. It's not a good experience. It's not optimized for that. But I think that is the future. A lot of us are like now writing code on our phones with Devin or like other AI agents. And there's this concept of background versus foreground agents. Right now, it's all foreground. You're making one change to a workflow or an agent at a time. What does it look like if you want to kick off multiple different changes at a time, at once, and then check back later? So, I talked a lot about building agents, right? In order to like build agents effectively, other things that we provide are, like full visibility and tracing, which we use ourselves, and of course all of our users use. So you can see some of that on the screen. And the ability, when you're ready to deploy, to ship it any way you want. So you can export executable SDK code that you can put in your own code base. You can get an API endpoint that you integrate with and it runs on our servers. Or you can just get an AI app that you can publish with one click that you can interact with or your users can interact with. So, that's sort of what we offer. And, I would be really excited if you guys check it out and try to build your agents and like, let me know what happens. So yeah, you can get access right there. There's a QR code, but don't use it on your phones. You won't like it. That's Agent Builder, and this is my last agent.